Hey guys, it's Norm from Tested. I'm here with Steve Sansweet.
Hey Norm.
At Rancho Obi-Wan, we are in one of your treasure rooms.
Yes, this is the treasure room, and here we have a shelf of items that were mostly not produced. And in particular, a lot of people from the time remember the missile-firing Boba Fett that Kenner promised to send to you, the new action hero. You didn't know whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, introduced in the holiday special in 1978. And the ads all said that he would have a missile-firing backpack. But unfortunately,
that's awesome.
Yeah, except there were product safety issues. And so this plain blue version was the first version, and it fired the missile. But that's when the Product Safety Commission first came up with the choke tube. And something had to be bigger than the choke tube in order to be able to sell to something that would be a toy for kids.
So not about kids shooting their eyes out, it's about swallowing.
It's about swallowing. And they tried a second version with what they called the J slot with a little locking mechanism. The problem was the missile was the same size. And so eventually what they sent out to consumers was something with a welded missile, no spring, and a little note saying, gee, sorry, if you don't like this, send it back and we'll send you another mini action figure. So, I don't know.
So how does that happen? Like, you know, a company will get a license to make Star Wars anything, and they'll submit, you know, plans and product samples to Lucasfilm, and some of those never get made, but they end up in the hands of collectors.
I mean, there are collectors out there, and in something like the missile-firing Boba Fett's, there were Hasbro employees who loved it, and there were hundreds of samples originally sent that were used for testing, and some of those just ended up being kept and then eventually being sold on the collector's market.
Right.
There's a piece that it took me 10 years to track down. It's a simple R2-D2 lunch pail. I had seen it in an ad slick for Thermos. I had seen the other lunch boxes. They were all produced. But this one, because I never saw it, became my holy grail for years. And I talked to a lot of lunchbox dealers, and a few of them said, we think those were made as salesman samples. And I left my card all over the place. 10 years after I started looking for it, I got a call from a dealer saying, I found one, it won't be inexpensive. And I said, tell me. And I finally bought it and then realized why it was never produced, because the vinyl, the hinge was so small, it would have snapped off after 2 or 3 times. Here's an idea that Kenner came up with in 1979 to do a line of really young kids' toys called Star Tots. But once again, because the 3 3/4 action figures were so popular, they never did it at the time. But this year, collectors at Celebration 6, our big fan convention, came up with versions of Star Tots as flat metal, almost like keychain kinds of things to sort of give homage to the original ideas. This is a complete line of 14 action figures that was never made. These were supposed to be from the Ewoks and Droids cartoon series. There was an initial series that were sold in 1985, but the series didn't continue. The Ewoks part continued for another season. Droids didn't. The figures didn't sell that well. So most of these are hand-painted prototypes, and they were never out in the market, never sold as carded figures, except for that one guy, Vlix, up there, which was sold in Brazil in 1988 on a card in very small quantities for some bizarre reason, has become a hot collectible. Down on this shelf were figures that were made, but these were figures that went to the factory in Asia. So they were hand-painted in Cincinnati, and paint trays were sent along to show the colors. There were only 2 figures that were never produced, but were fairly far along in the production process for Return of the Jedi. And one of them was Yarna del Gargon, the 6-breasted dancing lady.
Because who wouldn't want?
But you need. I mean, it's so important to your play pattern as a kid to have the 6-breasted,
yes,
slightly overweight dancing. So this is one of the sculpts of it. This is a fan made by a guy named Ryan Shaw of what it would have looked like, prototype, and then, you know, 25 years later, that figure in the back was the one they actually produced, and it sat on the shelf and didn't move because nobody wanted it now either. So, but that's there were a lot of pieces. Finally, the Yoda, that would have been a brilliant piece. That was supposed to come out in 1981 or 82. You pull a string, there's a plastic record, he says 8 different phrases in Yoda's voice. But that was canceled because not enough retailers were interested. It was at the same price point as 2 other Star Wars toys, and they said, oh no, we can't handle 3.
Yeah.
So it exists again as various forms of the prototype as they developed it going along. Lots of fun stuff.
And so many different variants and subtle nuance differences. That's all things you catalog.
Oh yeah, and yeah. For example, just the Talking Yoda. There are probably 6 versions of getting closer and closer to production, and finally, that is as close as you can come, but still never went into production. So there are also other pieces that get developed and then companion pieces supposed to be added to them. Like there was this great Darth Vader Cinemaquette that was direct market from Kenner. They didn't do the direct market too well, and so he was supposed to be followed by a Luke Skywalker. Luke only exists as a prototype in blue plastic. And then there are licensees that are, very popular. They do the little plush figures and things. But sometimes some of the stuff that they send to Lucasfilm, you wonder, what were they thinking in the design? And then you see a whole bunch of these figures which never made it to production. So.
And eventually, some of those end up in your collection.
Eventually, a lot of the companies get them back, and then they have no use for them, or things get on to the collector's market in various ways.
Very cool. Well, you have to make it over to Rancho Obi-Wan to check those out in person. Thank you, Steve. And for more from Rancho Obi-Wan, check Tested.com.
Thank you very much.
See you guys.